Okay.
What?
Okay. I'll we're going live, but yeah. But anyway, yeah, the LDS their general conference is always on the same weekend in April,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes that corresponds with Holy Week.
Mm.
And when Easter overlaps with Holy Week, they just skip Easter. Or when General Conference and Easter conflict, they skip Easter.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, it's like, that is a choice.
Well, I mean, whether or not you think Mormons are Christians or not is, I think, nicely answered by that.
Yeah,
Like, if you're going to cancel Easter,
that
which
was
is
kind of how I felt about it.
arguably
Okay,
the
we are
Christian.
live. Okay,
Hmm.
we are live. Yeah, it's like, that is a choice. Okay. Um, so hello everyone, and welcome to Nerd Church. The place where on Sundays we read through the Catholic lectionary and see what critical scholarship has to say, because we are Christians and we don't want to read the Bible like idiots. So we're turning to people who have dedicated their lives to figuring out how to read the Bible in the smartest way possible. So we are here on the second Sunday of Lent. And before we were getting started, we were throwing a little bit of shade on the decision of the LDS Church to cancel Easter in favor of General Conference, because for their religion, um, twice a year everybody gets together and all of the leaders get up and make speeches, and they just kind of talk about like the direction that the LDS Church is taking, which is, a good thing to do. But it always happens on one weekend in Easter, and when General Conference conflicts with Easter, they have General Conference instead of Easter, which is a choice. And to Christians who come from traditions where Easter is kind of like the big deal, it kind of makes you go, hmm. Which, again, like from, an Anglican or a Catholic point of view, saying that Mormons, you know, maybe are their own thing doesn't mean that they're bad people or that, they're doing terrible, horrible, nasty, evil things. It just means that, maybe they're not Christian, and that's okay.
It's allowed.
Yeah, it's allowed. I mean, from a very strict religious studies point of view, anybody who says that they're a Christian gets to count as a Christian, but I don't know. I mean, like, it's kind of the argument that, like, ultimately species aren't real. They're just a human construct. So, labels on religion aren't really real either. They're just a construct to a certain point. But, when, E. coli evolves the ability to metabolize lactose, or no, metabolize citrate, it ceases to be E. coli by definition. And in the same way, maybe if you cancel Easter, then, maybe you aren't Christian, and you just need to get really okay with that.
I think some of them are. I think there's some like conversations about that. I'm
Yeah,
not an expert. I
yeah,
have no idea.
yeah. And like I say, it's not my conversation to have, like, or rather, it's not my decision to have. I'm just providing input, and that's my input. But that's enough. And certainly there's plenty of stuff in the Bible to go through, and that's what we do on um, Sunday. So maybe our Mormons Christian is better as a Thursday conversation. Okay. So today we are in the second Sunday in Lent. And today this is one where I think we're going to more take it a piece at a time, just because the last week the readings told, I felt like, a really coherent story. And this year, honestly, they're kind of all over the place. So let's just get started. Okay, so Aldo, if you will do the honors on Genesis 12, um, Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 4.
Sure. The Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from the land of your kinsfolk and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. All the communities of the earth shall find blessing in you." Abram went as the Lord directed him.
Okay, and then the psalm, we have Psalm 33, verses 4 through 5, 18 through 19, and then 20 and 22.
Upright is the word of the Lord, and all his works are trustworthy. He loves justice and right. Of the kindness of the Lord, the earth is full. See, the eyes of the Lord are upon those who fear him, upon those who hope for his kindness, to deliver them from death and preserve them in spite of famine. Our soul waits for the Lord, who is our help and our shield. May your kindness, O Lord, be upon us, who have put our hope in you.
Okay, and then we have the second reading, which is then we have which is second Timothy chapter 1, 8 through 10.
Beloved, bear your share of hardship for the gospel with the strength that comes from God. He saved us and called us to a holy life, not according to our works, but according to his own design, and the grace bestowed on us in Christ Jesus before time began, but now made manifest through the appearance of our Savior Christ Jesus, who destroyed death and brought life and immortality to light through the gospel.
Okay. And then we have Matthew 17, 1 through 9.
Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus and replied, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and do not be afraid. And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead.
Okay. So there we go. And again, last week was a really tightly connected set of readings. This week is more just kind of all over the place. In a way, it's kind of like, okay, it's the second Sunday in Lent. You're starting to think, if you're an American, you're starting to think to yourself, maybe I shouldn't have given up chocolate. um, now giving up extra things for Lent, that isn't a thing in Mexico, is it?
It is not. I actually came across that tradition, let's say some 3 years ago. I was completely ignorant about it, and I felt it was a very curious tradition, actually,
Yeah,
because Mhm. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. As far as I know, it's very much like an Anglophone thing. It's because I've heard I've read stuff by Australian and English Catholics who give something up for Lent also. So I haven't like actually tracked down like where the actual of that is, but yeah, it's just kind of like an extra thing, and I'm not quite sure like why we started doing it. But I do know that it's something that's definitely been picked up by Catholics in the US in general. Like even Catholics who come from a Spanish speaking background will very quickly adopt the custom of giving up things for Lent, um, which led to a really interesting conversation between someone I know and her daughter over, is a tostada a chip? Because her daughter had given up chips for Lent.
Mhm.
So she had gotten a tostada and
Mhm.
was using, for anybody who doesn't know what a tostada is basically a corn tortilla that's been fried so it's crispy. And she was using a tostada to eat salsa. So is it a chip? Is it a tortilla? We don't know.
I mean, sounds like she's using it like it's a chip.
Well, that was her mom's argument. She was like, well, if you break it into chunks, it becomes a chip. I don't know. But anyway, so the point is that this is basically everybody's just kind of getting a little bit of a pep talk. Okay, this is cool. You can do this. By the way, here's the transfiguration, which in some ways it's kind of a weird place to stick the transfiguration because the feast of the transfiguration is August 8th. But apparently, there was a very old church tradition that had wanted to put the date of the transfiguration as being 40 days before the crucifixion. Um, and even though, like, that isn't like kind of that isn't the timeline that won out, basically, that tradition was still strong enough that they kind of stuck the transfiguration into this part of the lectionary. Um, and also it's a nice way of kind of getting people to mentally prepare for the resurrection. It's like, okay, you're kind of getting the preview of the resurrection in this thing so that it kind of gets your mind thinking, okay, yeah, Easter's coming, it's all going to be okay. So anyway, that's kind of what the lectionary is doing together. Now let's I guess unless anybody has something else to say, we can kind of start breaking them down. Start with Genesis, where he's not even Abraham yet.
That's right. So it's a for those of you who do not know, or perhaps have not taken the time to meditate about it, whenever in the Bible a character is has their name changed, it's kind of a big deal. So, as Katie mentioned, Abraham is not Abraham yet. So, this is before the big change, and it's basically, I think, the idea of those who put together the lectionary was to link Abraham's role in the Pauline epistles with, Jesus is portrayed along the New Testament as different characters. And one of them is Adam, as we saw in the previous readings. And this time with this reading from Genesis, we're trying to get this idea of Abraham, who is the one who, in some way, served God and got a promise, despite him not yet being circumcised and not yet being under the Jewish law. So he becomes this character who, let's say, brings together Jews and Gentiles, in the sense that he does the will of God, but he's not a Hebrew, he's not an Israelite yet, and yet he knows the one and true God. That is the most important part of this reading, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting regarding the rabbinic tradition, that this passage is interpreted in such a way that Abraham, there is this literary resource called midrash in the rabbinic literature, which is basically expanding on the biblical narrative. So they will pick some words, or perhaps they will find some phrase, some word in the Hebrew, and they will connect it with another similar word, similar wording, a similar phrase in some other section of the Hebrew Bible, whether it is the Psalms, the prophetic books, or whatever you want, and they will try to extract a different meaning, a new meaning. And of course, it can become really complex. And in this passage, to make a long story short, the rabbis say that Abraham is in some way rejected idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even this story about him smashing the idols of his father Terah. And it is then when he's called by God, and God promises him to make of him a great nation.
Yeah. Now, do we know anything about the etymology of the name Abraham or Abram?
As far as I know, there is no consensus on the etymology, but there is this folk etymology that comes after this passage. So they say you will become a father to the nations, or to the let me see, I can't remember the exact wording, but it is something like a father of a multitude of nations.
Mm-hmm.
So it is playing on the two words. First on the name of Abraham, Abraham in Hebrew, and then the Hebrew says Ab Rab Hamon, which is like father of a lot of peoples, or something like that. But it is a folk etymology. It is not what philologists would today consider a valid etymology under today's standards.
Yeah, that makes sense. The only thing that I wanted to add, and I like your point a lot about this also being a way of showing how, a Gentile comes to follow God. In this case, we've got it's Abraham is becoming Abraham. And of course, the other thing this is doing is, I think, providing a little bit of inoculation against anti-Semitism, because it's also, this is God establishing his covenant with the Jews. So it's basically showing, so it's also kind of very subtly just saying, okay, this is God making a covenant. And this covenant is still in effect. Because a lot of Christian anti-Semitism is basically built in the idea that Jesus came up with a new covenant. The new covenant wasn't accepted, and the people who didn't accept the old covenant, or the people who stuck with the old covenant and didn't accept the new covenant, are out of luck. This is making the argument, no, the old covenant, it's still in effect. Right there, boom. It's not our covenant, but it's a valid covenant.
Correct. And now that you brought up this distinction between the old and the new covenant, there's this idea in rabbinic literature about the patriarchs before Moses, who in some way they didn't get the whole Torah revealed, but you may notice in some passages, for example, later on in this passage, Abraham gets circumcised and circumcises all the people who are close to him. So that is taken by the rabbis in this midrash technique as a way to justify that despite Abraham not being given the full Torah, the whole Torah as Moses got from Mount Sinai, he would still participate from that covenant with God because he was partaking of some of the most important commandments. So, for example, for Noah, it was the not eating live animals, not eating flesh from a live animal. So I'm not sure if this was a thing in antiquity, but rabbinic literature tells that some people would, let's say, cut off some one of the limbs of an animal and they would eat it. I'm not sure if that is even possible.
Yeah. I think that the explanation that I've usually seen of the Noahide laws, as which, by the way, are the only laws that Jews believe are actually incumbent upon non-Jews, that the Noahide laws are basically like the minimum acceptable standard of human behavior. So, like, not amputating an animal's limb and then eating it is kind of like, not necessarily that most normal people would even have the urge to do that, but that's like the base level. It's the same way that incest is one of the things that's forbidden by the Noahide laws. Again, most normal people have no desire to do that anyway, but it's also something that unfortunately needs to be said.
Correct.
Yeah, so basically the idea, so if I'm following you, basically the idea is that the law was revealed slowly and in stages.
Yeah, you can say that.
Yeah. Until eventually you get to Sinai and Moses just says, okay, this is what we're doing now.
Exactly.
Okay. And was there anything else that you wanted to cover on that, or can we move on to the psalm?
Yeah, we can move on to the psalm, which I'd say, at least for me, it's added for flourish, as you say.
Yeah.
I don't really see any outstanding theme in this psalm, or any you know,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
anything
just,
worthy of having this very clear-cut connection with the
yeah,
rest of the hymn.
I think that if there's anything in there, the big one is, God loves justice and and righteousness kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then we have Paul's letter to Timothy. Yeah. Um,
I mean, there's nothing objectionable in this particular
yeah,
verse.
yeah. I was gonna say, of all the selection, there are things in Second Timothy that I would have a lot to say about.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty
This,
benign.
yeah, this one is pretty benign. I mean, I think, as always, when you're starting out with the Pauline epistles, you just have to start with, do people think Paul actually wrote this or not? And the general consensus on Second Timothy is that Paul didn't write it. And that's just because Second Timothy is one of the pastoral epistles, which are essentially dealing with problems of church administration. And it's basically things that just really weren't an issue until sometime in the second century. And so, because of that, the argument is usually that these epistles were included later. Um, and were either written pseudepigraphically, which means that somebody else wrote them and said, oh, yeah, and just wrote Paul's name across the top. There's also scholars who argue that the letters were originally being circulated either anonymously or with the name of the actual author. And then at some point, someone who wanted to make sure that that person got into the canon, or rather wanted to make sure that that letter got into the canon, attached Paul's name to it. Um, and the reason why they would have done that is because by the third century, when the canon was actually being formed, the decision was made that only traditions that were believed to go back from people who actually knew Jesus in person were going to be allowed. And Paul kind of got a pass because
He snuck in on a technicality.
exactly. He snuck in on a technicality. I mean, he was in Jerusalem at the same time Jesus was. And they probably knew, they
He heard a
probably,
voice.
yeah, well, okay, basically you could play the game 6 Degrees of Separation, where you figure out how many people are separating two people. Well, Paul was only 1 degree of separation away from Jesus while Jesus was alive. And then all the other apostles accepted Paul as a legitimate apostle. So Paul's okay. But anybody after Paul, nah. Which then presented a problem when you had these letters that were circulating that either nobody knew who wrote them, or they were pretty sure they were not written by Paul. So, you kind of you file off the serial numbers and you write Paul on top really big, and everybody goes, okay, sounds good. So that's why Timothy made it into the canon. But this is in reality probably something that was a late second century composition after the church had kind of started to get its act together. And and also, quite frankly, when you're having a religion, you need to have some kind of rules just about church administration and the way that people have to behave within a conversation, within a congregation. And basically we ended up with Timothy rather than, say, the Didache, which also almost made it in. But since there was no way of connecting the Didache to an apostle, the Didache didn't make it in. Second Timothy did. The big thing about the composition of Second Timothy that I find interesting is that it was probably, they think, written somewhere in Turkey or Anatolia, which, if that's the case, there's actually a really good chance that this was written by like Polycarp and Ignatius of Antioch have both been suggested as possible authors, which, if you're trying to, like, if you are a person who wants and needs to read this as scripture, in my opinion, even if you think Polycarp wrote it, I mean, Polycarp's a saint. Polycarp gets taken really seriously. So I don't think that you can necessarily make an authorship argument to toss Second Timothy out of the canon, even if you're from a tradition that's okay with tossing books out of the canon after, 1,500 years.
Well, I mean,
yeah, I know. I know. So what I'm hearing from you, Amanda, is that you're willing to forgive Paul. You're not willing to, you have less love for pseudo Paul.
yeah, just on its face, because even as a kid, I had a very steeped in biblical literature childhood. Um, uh, I was even part of a program where we memorized lots of verses. There was so much more Romans than there was like the Timothys. Like I can only recite one verse from Timothy.
Mhm.
But a bunch of stuff from Romans. They don't even sound like they're written by the same person.
No, they don't.
That's actually what always confused me as a kid, is just the construction of them, not even topically, but like what's happening on the page is so different.
Yeah.
Like,
And yeah. And like, those issues are like according to every piece of scholarship I've ever read, those issues of composition are even more glaring when you go back to the Greek.
oh, I bet. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm
yeah,
reading it in English because that is
yeah,
the
yeah.
only language I am fluent in because I'm an American, and that is just kind of how that stupidness works. But not bitter about that at all.
Okay,
Um,
okay. Just as a side note, speaking as a teacher who's actually taking a class on this topic right now, the entire American educational system is specifically designed to keep people from being fluently bilingual. It just is.
yeah, yeah.
There were very deliberate policy choices made that I would be glad to go into in great detail that
And the thing is, we could do
caused that
better.
to happen.
I know this because my siblings, my sister's little girls are both fluent in Spanish because they're in a Spanish immersion program and they
Yeah,
are fluent Spanish speakers.
yeah. It's starting to change, but that's how it is. But anyway, but what I was trying to say is, yes, you're right. And like, if you read it in Greek, it's like even more obvious. which is why the like standard apologetic argument is simply to say, well, Paul didn't write it himself. Paul had a scribe, and the dude who was Paul's scribe on Second Timothy and the dude who was Paul's scribe on Romans were not the same guy. Yeah. So my point is that like even the most like this is like Paul wrote Paul cooked argument is that it depends on there being like there being separate authors, like at least in the sense of, you know, somebody physically, the person who physically wrote the original autograph was not the same person. At least that's the Catholic apologetic argument.
I mean, I don't think you can.
Yeah, and I personally, I think that even that one doesn't hold water. But then I'm okay with, but then I, as a person, would be okay with, you know, Saint Polycarp's letter to Timothy being in the canon. You know, like all that has, to me, all that requires is basically saying, you know, okay, you know, the decisions that were made about what went into the canon, some of their criteria was a little bit off.
Yeah.
Because at this point, the canon is the canon. Whether we, you know, love it or hate it, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. That's, I mean, you've got got to take it for what it is, you know.
Yeah.
As long as I think actually honestly the people for whom it's the most difficult are people who have to have scripture be uh human transcription of God whispering in their ear.
Yeah.
Which uh, I mean, back to Paul again, because you can't escape Paul. Yeah, at some point he actually says, like, this is my opinion.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's the God breathed thing just isn't terribly
Yeah, exactly.
can't possibly mean transcription.
Exactly.
Especially when you think about the fact that Adam is God breathed as well. If you
Yeah,
really think about
exactly.
it.
Well, and I mean also that's kind of the like, you know, the counter to the counter to the scriptures God breathed thing, of course, is, you know, the word was God is from John. The word was God and the word was with God. Because if Jesus is the word, then the Bible is something else.
Right. Except for that is also
Yeah, exactly. Which also gets, yeah. I mean that's the thing, is that pretty much any way of interpreting scripture, like you end up with the like there's the good version of it and the bad version of it. And the bad version of it can usually get pretty bad. Okay, so now that we've talked about whether or not Paul wrote Second Timothy, let's see what the author of Second Timothy had to say. Um, I, so the part that I thought was particularly interesting is kind of this is He saved us and called us to a holy life, not according to our works, but according to his own design, and the grace bestowed on us in Christ Jesus before time began, but now made manifest. Which is interesting because it's kind of one way of taking the run at the whole faith versus works thing, because it's basically saying works aren't enough. But, and that ultimately what pulls you in isn't the work. What pulls you in is Jesus. And it's also interesting that the grace is bestowed before time began, which again, this becomes really important in especially Catholic theology after World War II, and is kind of at the heart of the Vatican II document on ecumenical dialogue, Nostra Aetate, which basically says that, which takes this chunk of Paul and says, if the grace is bestowed before time began, the grace is available, at least in some way, to all humans. So basically, in that argument, Catholicism becomes the best way, but not the only way. Which is, still a little bit, triumphalist on the part of the Catholic Church. But it's also not saying that, Episcopalians are going to burn in a lake of fire because they won't submit to Rome, which is the bad version of it.
Who that could be about.
It's just, submit to Rome because the Pope has really good opinions on AI.
Well,
has the Archbishop of Canterbury made any statements on AI? No.
No, but the new one incoming is a woman, so
Yeah.
just saying.
Yeah, that's true.
And my regional bishop-elect is a woman as well.
Yeah, that's actually as a side note, like the fact that Anglicans are going to have a female archbishop is really kind of splitting things, because
Oh yeah.
well it's like you've got the Catholic Church is basically preparing to scoop up all of the Anglicans who just can't cope. And at the same time, the really the people who are deeply against women's ordination are saying that, well, the Anglicans just won't have valid orders after there's a female Archbishop of Canterbury. And then there's also Catholics who are kind of thinking, if we brought in the Anglicans as a separate rite under the Roman Catholic Church and let them keep ordaining women, then you could be an Anglican Catholic woman priest. And they could even go offer mass in a Roman church, in a Roman Rite church, using their valid Anglican Catholic ordination.
This feels like progressivism with extra steps.
Yes.
It feels a little
Yes.
weird. I mean,
Yes.
especially since my priest is actually a former Catholic. She was raised Catholic.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that's the other part of it, is that a disproportionate number of Anglican women priests were raised Catholic and became Anglican specifically because they wanted to be priests. So a lot of them, if like, they were to get a phone call and be like, hey, it's Leo, we're getting the band back together.
Now you have me curious as whether how she would feel about that.
Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, I don't know. Like I say, like Pope Leo is from Chicago, and therefore, in the fine tradition of the Blues Brothers, he understands that when you're on a mission from God, the first thing you got to do is get the band back together.
I mean,
So, he's although to be fair, Leo is mostly working on the Orthodox and the various independent Eastern Rite churches. He's not snuggling up to the Protestants so much. That's more something that's happening in the German Bishops' Conference. They've been kind of like calling up the like old Catholics and being like, hey, I heard that you ordained a woman bishop. I'm kind of curious about that. What does that feel like? Do you want to tell me a little bit about that? It sounds kind of cool.
oh. Interesting. Well, I mean, because there seems to be a little bit of a split in the Anglican Episcopalian world because a
Yeah,
lot of places like you knew that there were like women priests, but if you didn't have one and your bishop wasn't, you could kind of ignore it.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
Bishop of Canterbury being
yeah. That's really hard. That's really hard to ignore.
right.
And actually, the to be clear, what I think is going to happen in the Catholic Church, honestly, at least in my lifetime, is that they're probably going to let women do absolutely everything except become priests. Like, we will have women deacons, we will have women cardinals before we have women priests.
Don't you have to be a priest to be a cardinal?
No, no, no. We'll do a separate. We should probably do like a whole separate video on that. But the short answer is a cardinal is somebody that the Pope says is a cardinal. In the past, there have been laymen who were cardinals.
What? Maybe I don't know what cardinals do.
Okay, cardinals pick the Pope.
Well, yeah, but that's not like a thing you do every day. Like
Yeah.
that's not a whole job.
No, it's not a whole job.
I mean, for the couple weeks that is the conclave, then yeah, sure, but like
Yeah,
the rest of the time, what are you doing?
Um, a lot of okay, we're just going to do a separate video on what's a cardinal because that's going to get like
Fine.
too long. But the short answer is they do a lot of other stuff. Like, being a cardinal is a side gig.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not your whole
Okay.
job.
It's not your whole job. Okay.
It's not your whole job. It's just like
It's your
something.
part-time job or your side
Yeah,
hustle or your like
yeah,
hobby
yeah.
vocation.
Yeah, it's like a side hustle. Like, for example, Blaise Supich is a cardinal, and he's also the Archbishop of Chicago.
Okay.
So like most of the time he just like runs Northern Illinois.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's any clearer, but we'll do a whole other thing.
Okay, yeah. We will sit down and explain the whole org chart. Okay. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, there's kind of like not that there's kind of not a whole lot going on here, but in Second Timothy. So and I think you can tell that in the way that we just veered straight off topic.
Right off. I have to
Yeah.
say that we at the Holy Trinity Episcopal, we read Romans instead.
Instead of the
The
gospel.
superior Pauline epistle.
Yeah.
Where Paul makes an argument about merit and righteousness and faith and works, how we do not deserve, which coincided nicely with a separate book I am reading by somebody who I don't think is writing from a Christian perspective. I mean, he does like write about it, but it's a philosopher because I like Paul. I'm into philosophers. I don't know. It's a problem.
Okay. So we've got the transfiguration in Matthew, and that's one of those things that I think the first thing that really sticks out is that this is something that has a very strong literary quality. So I think that it's, reasonable to say that whether or not something like this happened that gave rise to the story, that whoever wrote Matthew is imagining this dialogue. And he's kind of filling in a lot of detail. So at this point, I don't think we need to I think we can do what I'm saying is I want to just sort of like treat the story as a story, kind of almost outside of its historical context. Because did Jesus literally go up on a mountain and they saw all this stuff happen is really the least important and the least interesting part of the gospel. And everybody here who believes in biblical literalism, raise your hand. Yeah. You saw how fast Aldo got his hand down? Yeah.
I was scratching my head.
Yeah, exactly. He was scratching his head. Okay. So and I just the first thing before we get into the fun part is I just want to throw out, or the serious part, I mean, is I just want to get out there that Moses and Elijah showing up and Peter's immediate question being, do I need to like set up a couple extra tents so that like Moses and Elijah will have a place to stay? Is, I mean, just objectively really funny.
I mean,
because and I think that like in a way though it kind of tells you it's kind of one of those things where like that's a really Peter thing to say. Like if you want to understand like how we're supposed to be thinking about Peter, it's Peter is a guy who cares about practicality, right? Peter is like, he just wants to make sure that things are working and everybody's comfortable. And, like maybe they're sticking around. He doesn't know. All he knows is, Moses has to stay somewhere.
Well, I mean, there's like the custom of setting a place for Elijah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, there is something in there. And
I mean,
yeah. Yeah,
I'm just amused by the fact that Peter knew who they were right off the bat.
yeah.
I'm kind of impressed. Like, how did he know?
Yeah. Well, it's like, who else is it going to be? Right.
I mean, I don't.
Well, and that's actually kind of interesting is that Peter, and that's actually a really interesting point, is that Peter looked at both of them and was like, oh, obviously that's Moses and Elijah. Now, and which is interesting because there's a lot of art of the transfiguration, and it's kind of interesting how people will choose iconographically to make sure that that it's Moses and Elijah.
Mhm.
Like a lot of times Moses will actually in art will actually be like holding tablets, and like sometimes Elijah will have like a little like flaming wheel with him, or there'll be an angel next to him or something, so that it's Elijah.
But
Sometimes
that's not a Jewish tradition,
no,
correct?
no, 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 no,
There's
no, no,
like,
no, 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 no. I'm talking about like in Christian
yeah,
art, like
yeah.
how it's depicted, how the transfiguration is painted.
Hmm.
And then Moses will sometimes have horns, because and the whole Moses having horns things is of course coming from Genesis, or sorry, Exodus, where it's described that Moses's face was shining like a corona, like a crown, except it got mistranslated as the Latin word for horns. So in a lot of Renaissance art, you'll see when Moses is depicted, he has these like cute little like ram's horns.
That is one hell of an error.
Yeah, it is. It also unfortunately leads to the, at least mildly anti-Semitic trope that Jews have horns.
Yeah, that's kind of
And like
heartbreaking.
I know people who went to public school, like not so much now, but like maybe in like the 50s or 60s, and apparently even into the 80s in some places, who literally had other little kids ask them where their horns were when they found out that they were Jewish, which is horrible. Don't do that. Don't treat that. Don't teach that to your kids. Like, just no.
It was
But
not something I heard as a kid, I'm going to be
yeah,
honest with you.
yeah. Well, no, and most people don't anymore, but like it was an incredibly common folk belief, even into the 20th century.
I think Amy Jill Levine tells a similar story about being asked, since she lived in near a Portuguese Catholic community. She
Yeah,
was asked by a little girl at school whether she had horns or not. I think it was her story as well.
yeah, and I've heard a similar thing from other people. um so yeah. But actually that brings up a really interesting question: is why did the author of Matthew stick in Moses and Elijah? And why, in the story, are we supposed to assume that Peter just kind of looked at him and we're like, okay, if there's two guys come down from heaven, it's got to be Moses and Elijah.
Mhm.
Moses, I think, is pretty obvious it should be pretty obvious at this point, especially with the project that Matthew has of showing that Jesus is the new Moses. But this it also seems to be showing that we're also supposed to be thinking of Jesus as the new Elijah. So Aldo, maybe you could explain a little bit about who Elijah is and maybe why Elijah is showing up in Matthew.
Of course. So Elijah is this wonder-working prophet, and he's depicted in the second book of Kings, and he basically what he does is he shows this zealousness about God because there is all this idolatry going on in Israel. So we have this famous scene where he goes against the 400 prophets of Baal, and he brings fire down from heaven. He resurrects some people. He's taken to heaven, still alive in a fiery chariot. And in some ways, Jesus resembles and reenacts some of the miracles Elijah uh, does. But it is also interesting that there's this passage in one of the Gospels where Elijah is equated to John the Baptist. So there's this, it can get really convoluted and very complex in the sense that some people would derive from this statement from Jesus that John the Baptist was actually Elijah, that there were some Christian groups in antiquity who believed in reincarnation. So they based this belief out of this passage. And this, the transfiguration in a sense is one of my, I've been asking scholars around because I have always had the sense that Elijah didn't die. He was taken alive in this fiery chariot. Moses, according to Josephus, Jewish historian of the first century, he was not. Of course, we know from Deuteronomy that he died and he was buried. But according to Josephus, there was this Jewish tradition that Moses was taken up to heaven in a cloud. So he didn't really die. And then, so we have two people who didn't actually die according to Jewish tradition. But then there's the elephant in the room. The third person who would not be, who didn't die was Enoch, the antediluvian patriarch. So I was asking Dr. Justin Sledge from Esoterica. I asked Dr. Adolfo Reutemann, who is a former curator of the Dead Sea Scrolls, about this vision, because I had the sense that perhaps either Jesus was a reincarnation of Enoch, according to Matthew, or perhaps he was, substituting or replacing Enoch in that sense. So what Dr. Reutemann said was that he didn't think Jesus was standing there as an Enochic figure, but he was, kind of a transition between the law, that is Moses, and the eschaton, Elijah. So the eschaton is the end of days. And there's actually one of the last verses from the book of Malachi mentions Elijah as coming back before the great day of the Lord. So that's the way Dr. Reutemann interpreted the transfiguration and these three characters appearing there. I still want to think that it has to do something with Enoch, but of course, if you have to trust someone, trust either Dr. Justin Sledge or trust Dr. Adolfo Reutemann.
Yeah. Although there's a book that's just come out that I haven't read at all. And I just heard about a couple days ago when CJ Cornwait interviewed Dr. Furda on his channel. And Furda has just come out with a book. I don't even remember the title. I've got it, in my save for later on Amazon. But basically, his argument is that the idea that we have that Jesus's messiahship being thought of as being like a spiritual messiahship that's going to involve the kingdom of God not being established through earthly military means, but through like some kind of a resurrection or transformation or something like that, actually goes back to Jesus's teachings. And no, I don't want to misrepresent Furda's argument. He's not saying that in an apologetic sense, right? He's not saying, oh, Jesus said that I'm going to be the Messiah in a new way. And then Jesus got crucified and Christianity happened. Therefore, Jesus is God. What Ferda's saying is that Jesus was thinking of his messiahship in kind of the same way that we know historically that the Essenes believed that they were going to march out and then all of God's angels were going to descend and wipe out the Romans, right? That in the same way that was the Essenes' plan, that Jesus's understanding and the understanding of his followers was that something was going to happen, whether that was the crucifixion or something else, and that was going to trigger God acting directly in the world. And that what changed was that after Jesus was crucified was that you had this idea, okay, Jesus was crucified, Jesus was resurrected. So now in order to finish things, Jesus has to come back. So at least that was the understanding that I got from from the interview that Dr. Ferda gave, was that basically Ferda's arguing that the change in the theology of the Jesus movement was the second coming, not the resurrection. Which, I mean, I want to read the book and I want to talk to other people who have the capacity to evaluate specifically like the linguistic and text-based arguments. But I do think that it's a very interesting argument. There's also interpretations that want to look at this as Dr. James Tabor, for example, uses this as part of his argument that basically Jesus and John the Baptist really were relatives, and that they were and that they had this sort of vision of like a dual messiahship, where Jesus was going to be the lawgiver, and John the Baptist was more of this mystical sort of Elijah figure. So that originally this vision of the transfiguration was basically, you've got John the Baptist who's Elijah and you've got Jesus who's Moses, which I think is definitely, I mean, I'm always hesitant to disagree with scholars, and I think that he's certainly right that and in this case I genuinely agree with Tabor, is that that's certainly an available reading, that we've equated John the Baptist and then we've with Elijah, and therefore logically Jesus is Moses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be too.
Yeah. And and also I think that with all of these texts, part of the point is that there's not one obvious interpretation. So you really have to sit there and fight and wrestle with the text, and maybe some things are true, and maybe two things can be true at the same time. And then of course, at the end of it, Jesus is by himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, don't tell anybody about this until I've been raised from the dead. And then of course we've got this is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased, whatever that means.
That's an interesting passage, and I wanted to link it to to make a contrast, to compare it with 2 Timothy, because here we have the idea of the Christologies. So what we have in Matthew
Keep
would be
talking. I
called.
have to run to the ladies, but I'll be right back.
Sure. So there's among scholarly circles, there's this idea of the Christologies. So just to get into the basics, a low Christology is that Jesus was a human being and he had some sort of divine calling. And a high Christology would be these ideas that Christ preceded the creation, that he was created equal to the Father, and all these, according to the scholars, later ideas. So it's interesting to notice that in the text of Second Timothy, they make this mention of not according to our works, but according to his own design, and the grace bestowed on us in Christ Jesus before time began. So that is implying the idea that the Christ existed before time began. But on the other hand, if you notice in this passage from Matthew, the voice from the cloud says, "This is my beloved son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And I think it is in the Gospel of Luke. This same passage has a variant reading which goes along these lines, which says, "This is today I have begotten you." So that implies that Jesus was a regular human being, and when the transfiguration takes place, it is until then that Jesus becomes the Christ, and this would be a low Christology. So just in a very crude way, what I would say is that the lower Christology is earlier and the higher Christology is later. But
Yeah.
of course, it's much more complex than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it is generally true. Like, I think it's generally accepted as true that the lower Christologies are probably earlier than what we call a high Christology. And I mean, you can even see that just in the way that with Mark, there's no with Mark, the baptism looks like very like you can see where adoptionism comes from.
Mhm.
Because the plain reading of that, if you don't already have the Trinity in your head, is that at that moment, is that Jesus's baptism is when he becomes the Christ. And then, you have here, the transfiguration is when Jesus becomes the Christ. And I, in some ways, I wonder if maybe that's why adoptionism didn't end up winning out, is just because if you take adoption, if you take adoptionism seriously, right?
Mhm.
Then you immediately run into the problem of like, okay, so when did Jesus get adopted? Because there's like two separate points, right? Whereas if you assume that Jesus became the Son of God at his conception, there's only one point in the text that could have happened. I mean, of course, I'm speculating about like theological arguments that happened in, back rooms of Alexandria in the 4th century, that, and as the musical Hamilton has, taught us, nobody was in the room, nobody was in the room when it happened.
Mhm. Yeah.
But but I do think that it's, that it is very interesting to see how people, as they're figuring, as they're in the process of figuring out the Trinity, and they're figuring out the exact nature of the incarnation, that to kind of look at the passages and say, okay, well, how did they get this idea out of the text? Because and this is really the one area that I very much disagree with some critical scholars who want to talk about the Trinity being read into the text. Because no, I mean, I 100% think it's true that like modern Christians who approach the text with the Trinity in their heads are reading the Trinity into the text. But I think that the people who came up with the doctrine of the Trinity were very much like going to the text and trying to figure out, okay, how did the incarnation happen? How did it work? What's the mechanics? And they looked at passages like this and sort of put, sort of took, as Dan McClellan always, his favorite phrase, they took the Lego bricks, right?
Mm.
And they kind of, took the Lego bricks and used that to put together the high Christology and the current understanding of the incarnation, which didn't happen until, like, as we all know, didn't actually get codified until the Council of Nicaea. And it was really several hundred years after that that the current understanding of the mechanics of the incarnation actually became dominant. And even now, there are, Orthodox Christian groups. There's including actually the Chaldean Catholic Church is actually Miaphysite.
What was that?
Yeah. Miaphysite is basically the idea. Oh, okay, I always think of it as a diagram of a cell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have the nucleus of the cell and then you have the mitochondria, and they both make the cell work. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. As anybody who got their science instruction in English in the last 50 years learned. But the point is, in Miaphysite theology, you have the godly nature and you have the human nature, and they're all contained within Jesus, but they remain essentially separate. Whereas the more normal Catholic and Orthodox and Eastern Christian interpretation is that Jesus's divine nature and human nature were inexorably joined in what's called the hypostatic union. So kind of like the way that you make chocolate milk, you have milk and you have chocolate syrup, and you put the chocolate syrup in there and you stir it around really, really, really hard, and then it's chocolate milk. It's like that.
Okay, perfect. And going back to this idea of the early Christology, I mean, it makes sense that it is earlier because we have these passages from 2 Samuel and First Chronicles, where it says about Solomon when he's about to be crowned king of Israel. God says, "I will be a father to him, and he will be my son." So the idea of a monarch, a king, being the son of God goes back to the pharaohs and mostly any kind of royal family. So it is not the Israelites are not the exception, and this idea is carried on from Solomon's times to the New Testament.
Yeah. And in a way, you can kind of see an echo of that in the way that it's understood that baptism is that kind of adoption that Solomon went through, because that was kind of the later interpretation, is once you have this high Christology, is to look at that kind of anointing that Solomon went through and baptism as the same kind of adoption, where you become adopted as the son or daughter of God, and therefore Jesus is kind of like your brother.
Right.
Which is, of course, the way of explaining away the fact that the same language that's used to describe Jesus is the same language that's used to describe Solomon, because once you have a high Christology, that's kind of a problem.
Exactly. And not trying to well, perhaps I'm giving a spoiler for Easter, but that triumphal entrance to Jerusalem is very similar to this passage when Solomon is anointed king of Israel and he rides a donkey as well.
Yeah.
But
Well, actually,
Mhm.
that's a spoiler for Palm Sunday,
Yeah.
which
And it makes more sense when you read all these references to the people calling Jesus the son of David. He isn't only the son of David in the sense that he's a descendant of David, but he's perhaps even being equated to Solomon in that sense.
Mhm.
He's the
Well,
heir to that throne,
yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
which is the
and I
most
think,
important part.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I think that it's kind of interesting that just in the passages that we've read, there's an effort to, in some way, equate Jesus to pretty much every prominent figure in like every prominent male figure in the Hebrew Bible is in some sense prefiguring Jesus, like, or is, or is being like, Jesus is being presented as like, well, Moses did this, but Jesus did this. Solomon did this, but Jesus did this. So it's like Jesus is doing it, but Jesus is doing it more and better.
I
Mhm.
mean, that's super important to a lot of like Christian readings of the Hebrew scriptures.
Yeah.
Like that, I mean, as a precursor of Christ, or that's kind of really common
Yeah.
Christian reading of
Yeah. Yeah,
so much,
exactly.
which is why I think a lot of Christians struggle to understand uh Jewish people not reading it that way.
Yeah. Although, and to be fair, I think that one of the things that we're seeing right here today is that's that idea that like Jesus is somehow like, he's like Moses but better, he's like Elijah but better, he's like Moses, or rather he's like Solomon but better, is an idea that even the authors of the text of the Gospels kind of had in the back of their minds. And it's just that, sort of, modern Christian theology, at some point Christian theology like latches on to that idea and just runs with it.
Well, I mean, you kind of have to.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, not have to, but it's just a natural tendency, I
Yeah,
think,
it,
to
it, it
go
it's a logical outgrowth.
right.
Yeah. And of course, because it's also, providing us with this idea that Jesus is the Son of God, which leads us to the Trinity. Um, at least, a Trinity in some sense, because of course then the big debate becomes the relation of the Father to the Son. And that's something that we've been going for a while. So that's probably something that we'll have another chance to unpack. But I just wanted to throw out the idea there that I think that the idea of Jesus as the Son of God is something that in a way almost necessitates the Trinity. Because if Jesus is the Son of God and you don't have the Trinity, then the crucifixion becomes child abuse. In the same way that Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac becomes child abuse. There are a lot of Jewish traditions, going back to the very earliest commentaries that we have that say that, basically after Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac, Isaac was no longer psychologically okay, that he was damaged by the experience. And there's also a tradition that Sarah, when Abraham and Isaac came back, that Sarah and Isaac, who was a grown man at this time, not a little kid, that Sarah and Isaac just took their share and left. And that's why Abraham has to go and visit Sarah's grave. So, that kind of, gives you an idea of and, there's some Protestant doctrines like the eternal subordination of the Son that get really ugly. So what I'm going to suggest is that basically this passage isn't just one of the building blocks for the Trinity. It's also one of the reasons why people as humans felt that the Trinity was necessary. Because if the crucifixion is God coming to earth and then sacrificing himself, because obviously most people would say that if somebody chooses to give up their lives for other people, that's okay. If somebody says, okay, we'll kill that one, that's not okay. And that's why I kind of, think of the Trinity as being kind of one of those load-bearing dogmas, where it's where it's you may not like it and it may be kind of ugly, but if you try to take it out, the whole system starts having problems.
Yeah, definitely.
Of course, the other way to do that is to try to get rid of the idea that the crucifixion mattered.
Or it happened.
Or that it happened, because, and indeed, it's worth throwing out there that yeah, and it's actually worth throwing out there that say in the Quran, they, there's the tradition, God doesn't allow a prophet to be murdered. So therefore, the guy who got crucified was not Jesus. And that, all of the appearances of Jesus in the Gospels were just Jesus running around talking to people.
Because, well, and you also have the Gnostic.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you end up with hologram Jesus, which is the other way of handling it. Is to, but if you're going to but the point is that at a certain point, if you're going to have Jesus, but the point is that it really is kind of a logical outgrowth of just starting with text that says Jesus is the Son of God, and then trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean? And this is kind of, one of the places where we have to go, okay, what does that mean? And that's, something to think about as we are running up into Easter. Okay, it's about 5:30, which is when we normally start wrapping up. Does anybody have any closing thoughts or things that got left out?
No, not me.
Okay. So, time for a couple of parish announcements. My video editor is no longer is no longer sick in bed. So that video will be coming up very, very soon. Really, we promise, but for real this time. And then next week, and then next week on Thursday, Dapper Dinosaur will be coming back for some updates on the current state of the Society of St. Pius X and their attempts at schisming off from the Catholic Church, because they're bringing up some really creative arguments that have not been advanced since at least in the last 1,000 years. Like, spoiler, just as a brief spoiler, for example, the argument of, does the Pope actually have the exclusive right to appoint bishops? Which was something that, most of us thought had been settled during the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, there's somebody with a PhD in patristics who said, actually, that's just kind of your opinion, man. So we're going to see where we go. Oh, one thing that I did want to do before we closed, in the previous discussions of the SSPX, I had been unknowingly passing along bad information about the biography of Bishop Athanasius Schneider. I had I had not done my own research. Like Pope Benedict, I found out that you really should just Google people's names and see what pops up. Because I had been getting my information from tradcaths who all really, really like Bishop Schneider, who had been comparing him to what they call the bad German bishops, which is all of them except Cardinal Mueller and Bishop Schneider, and had kind of been implying that Bishop Schneider had been exiled to darkest Kazakhstan for telling the truth. That is not the case. It turns out that Bishop Schneider is descended from ethnic Germans who Germany got really bad politically in the 1840s. A whole bunch of people immigrated to the Americas. So anywhere you go, whether we're talking the US, Canada, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, have huge German populations that are descended from German immigrants. A bunch of them, however, also went east and ended up in Central Asia, which is where Athanasius Schneider was born. So basically, he is where his family has been, roughly speaking, for the past couple hundred years. So basically, he's just teaching patristics. He's been teaching patristics at a seminary in Kazakhstan for almost 30 years at this point. So I kind of feel like that whatever he's saying, I feel like Schneider at least is an honest actor who is making good faith arguments based on what he believes to be best for the Catholic Church. And when I implied that he might be like out for revenge or otherwise acting in his own self interest, that was unjust. And I want to apologize to him for that. On the very off chance that anybody who knows Athanasius Schneider ever sees this video, I just want to go on the record. So here we go. The other parish announcement is that Gerard O'Connell, the longtime Vatican correspondent for America the Magazine, has a book that is going to be published on March 25th, because basically, even though cardinals aren't supposed to talk about what goes on in the conclave, people will let things slip idly in conversation. And if you're a really, really smart reporter, you can put the pieces together, especially if your wife, whose name I just blanked on, which is sexism, and I'm sorry, but I've also never seen an interview with her, is a Argentine correspondent for one of the major, for La Nacion, which is one of the major papers in Argentina. So she gets to talk to but between the two of them, they can talk to all the cardinals and pick up side conversations in a variety of languages. And they wrote a whole book about what went down inside the conclave that's entitled Francis's Last Surprise. And I'm pretty sure that when that book comes out, people are going to lose their ever-loving minds. So sometime in April, we're going to have to sit down and talk about what went down inside the 2026 conclave.
Okay.
Because the people who don't like Pope Leo are really not going to like Pope Leo when it becomes, if the dominant narrative becomes that Francis kind of maneuvered him into place as his heir.
Well, I mean, I think these are the kind of people who are probably looking for reasons to not like him. So like,
and these are the people, and the other reason why it matters is that the Venn diagram of people who don't want Leo to be Pope and people who are going to at least contemplate following the SSPX into schism is, well, it's not quite a circle, but it's really, really close to being a circle. And they are going to be using the information about the conclave, perhaps as a way to justify siding with the SSPX as we continue with Schism Watch 2026. I don't know. We need to think about, like, if the split between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church is the Great Schism, what are we going to call the split between the Catholic Church and the SSPX? Because it's not the Great Schism. It's just kind of like it's like the it's like the mid-level schism.
The mid schism.
It's not the mids, yeah, or the mess schism. Yeah, we need to workshop it. Also, just before we close, very quick reminder, we are still soliciting saint nominations for our Pentecost Madness. I'm going to throw in Pier Giorgio Frassati, who just got canonized. His feast day is July 4th. So people who are looking for an alternative, feel free to celebrate Pier Giorgio Frassati Day on July 4th, because if anybody deserves to have a whole lot of fireworks set off, it's someone who, got into fistfights with fascists. Just saying. So, everyone, speaking of someone else who would get into fistfights with fascists, this is Ronan. Okay. So anyway, I will let everybody go, and everyone have a wonderful night. And we will see you back.